You.
Awesome. So the first and foremost, it's a pleasure to spend time with everybody. And then secondly, I just wanted to spend a couple minutes, one, acknowledging somebody in the room, and then secondly, just some background on Octave and what our policy vehicles are and lenses are and that good stuff. But the first person is, what's going on, Dale? It's been a minute, my friend. I miss you. How you doing?
Miss you as well, buddy.
Yeah. As Drew said, I had spent how long was it? eight and a half years at the Delaware Department of Education, something like that, where I was an associate secretary for workforce support. So I had there 4 areas of leadership. So the first was around CTE, the second was our higher ed office, the third was educator preparation, and the fourth was educator licensure and certification. And I had the pleasure in that working with Dale for many years around how we think about kind of blurring the line between CTE programs, IDEA, voc rehab, and then other support services for students with disabilities. And that was pretty awesome. So Dale, a quick shout out, and just, it's nice to see you. The rest of my background stuff, so I worked in Delaware for a little over 8 years. I worked in Maryland as a program specialist, and I had a couple areas of work. Quite a bit was connected to Race to the Top at that time. So I led some school turnaround initiatives. I led some community school stuff. Did a bunch of work with educators, particularly around educator professional learning and growth, teacher leadership, those types of things. And then before that, I was a teacher. I taught both high school and middle school. So that's my quick background. So who is familiar with Octave before I jump in on anything else? Like, what's the level of, okay, I'm going to start at the very beginning. Is that okay? And then we can kind of jump into, okay, wonderful. So Octave, in a nutshell, we have 4 policy lenses with which we kind of view our work. So the first is we administer the federal Perkins program. So there are about 8.5 million secondary students that participate in CTE programs at the high school level. There are another 3.5 million adult learners who participate in post-secondary CTE programs, most predominantly in community colleges, but also in adult technical centers, depending on how different states configure CTE programs. So first policy area is career and technical education, about 12 million plus people that participate in that program. The second area is we administer Title II of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which is adult education and family literacy. So there's a whole host and range of programs that falls in that space. So one of which is the adult basic education program. So kind of helping adults to pursue a high school diploma or a high school equivalency. We also lead a work portfolio that's around integrated employment and training programs. So this is around adult literacy and numeracy, as well as programs that help to credential adult learners. We also lead quite a bit around immigration and citizenship, so particularly through the integrated civics education and English language programming. And we also do work around English language learners or adult ELLs. So that's that second kind of Title II of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. The third policy area that we lead is around corrections education. So this is really helping individuals who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated pursue various types of high school and post-secondary education. Again, adult education, career and technical education, support for apprenticeship, as well as support for 2-year and 4-year degrees. And then the very interesting piece that's occurring there is the full reinstatement of Pell starting in July. So it will really open up quite a bit in terms of access for individuals who are incarcerated to pursue financial supports to access higher education across our country, which is great. And then the fourth area is around community colleges. So we lead the administration's work focused on support for our community college and our community and technical college system nationally. And then the big push there is trying to dust off and revitalize tuition-free community college models across the country. So those are our 4 areas of policy. I'm going to just pause if there's anything that you want me to go into a little bit further in terms of each of those 4 areas, or does that quick drive by, make sense from different perspectives? I got it, David. You get like the gold star for like interaction and feedback. Like, nicely
Excellent.
done, sir.
Does anyone feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question on those? Okay, I guess we can move forward. Thank you.
Okay. So then in terms of my objectives today, the first, I have 2 objectives. So the first is I would just like to get to know you in terms of your group's work. And I'm hoping that this is the first of several conversations and not a one and done. So more than anything, I hope that this builds a relationship, and I hope that we're able to kind of move different policy objectives together. Would love to do that. The second is I wanted to provide just a little bit of a runway around the different policy vehicles that we have, as well as some of the work that's taking shape in each of those, both to invite you into that work and then also to collect your feedback and thoughts on how that work should further take shape. So really what I'm hoping today is, A, we were building a relationship, and number 2, we can have a conversation around some of the policy and some of the work products, and then we'll continue that conversation. Is that okay?
That sounds wonderful.
Okay. And it is my assumption, but I don't want to presume that this group is most interested in our career and technical education work at the secondary level and probably the post-secondary level, as well as the community college work portfolio.
We would be more interested in the post-secondary portion. But certainly we know that secondary feeds into post-secondary, but post-secondary is really the focus of most of our work.
Okay, awesome. And so I can focus on community colleges and post-secondary CTE. I can touch a little bit on secondary CTE. To what degree do you want me to get into adult education? On that list of 3 things so far, where does that one rank?
Well, some of our programs are implementing their programs through adult education. So if you'd like to touch on that some, I think
Okay.
that would be fine, because in the programs that are currently established, of course, most of those are younger students that have just exited the K-12 and that have moved on to post-secondary education. But some programs, in the different ways that they're formatting their comprehensive transition and post-secondary program, they're sort of constructing that using adult education, tying that with CTE.
Yep. Okay. All right. So I'll walk through community colleges. I'll walk through post-secondary CTE and some work around the CTE systems, and then we'll talk a little bit about adult ed.
Okay.
We'll kind of prioritize those accordingly. That's wonderful. And Drew, thank you for the outline and feedback. All right. So in terms of our community college work, there are 3 main goals. So the first goal is around college affordability. So there was, I'm sure you saw, some effort under the Biden-Harris administration around tuition-free community colleges that was created during the Build Back Better piece of legislation that unfortunately did not kind of move forward. So in terms of college affordability, we have a 2-pronged strategy that we're undertaking right now. The first prong is we are working directly with states to forward a college affordability model. So there are a number of states where we've done kind of a political and financial analysis on that we think are positioned to both offer new tuition-free community college programs, as well as expand existing state promise programs. And those take shape over a couple of different formats. But the first kind of prong in this puzzle is we are working with states directly, both with constituency and advocacy groups, as well as governors in a set of states to help forward college affordability and tuition-free college programs in those states and geographies directly. So that's kind of prong number 1. The second part is we are going to offer some guidance, particularly around the use of remaining ARP, gear funds, and different things like that, to continue to expand free college programs, as well as apply different financial vehicles to support those. So part of this, second part of college affordability is offering information. It's providing guidance. It's also charging the right people with actions that can be taken forward kind of in this space. And then hopefully we are working on the budget process right now to create budget authority around a tuition-free vehicle that exists nationally, or can be a little bit more discreet in terms of discretionary programming as well. So there's a couple prongs to the college affordability component. The second piece of that work strategy is services and supports to students. So we're working across kind of the broader federal family to make sure that the right services are available to students who qualify for them. So an example here is we are working right now with USDA around some of the student SNAP exemptions that exist, particularly those around zero EFC and the work study exemption that had been created during the public health emergency, to kind of move those opportunities and that information into kind of to continuing beyond the public health emergency. And there is some flexibility that's provided around like how states use FAFSA data and different things along those lines to qualify students for public benefits and services and in a more streamlined and efficient way. So there's some guidance that we're working on. There's some MOUs that we're working on. There's also some regulatory pieces that we're working on in terms of like codification of those practices and ensuring, again, that students have the basic needs and services available to them to promote both an enrollment and completion agenda. The third thing that we're working on with community colleges is really information around community colleges. There is not a strong research agenda around community colleges and responsive workforce systems across our country. So we're working to both kind of shepherd that research agenda. We're seeking to expand data models, particularly around short and long-term credential programs, in addition to the data that are currently connected around iPads. And then the third area that I would offer kind of in the community college space is we want to provide information to the field on really just how differently states fund higher education across the country. It is a unique thing from state to state and often municipality or county to county within a given state. So higher ed financing, if I could use one word to describe it, it is inconsistent across our country. And I'll give you an example. So Pennsylvania is one of the states that we're working with in terms of promoting a tuition-free college agenda. There are 16 community colleges in the state of Pennsylvania. All 16 are funded differently in terms of state allocation, direct tuition, and dollars that are generated through their kind of authorizing body, whether that's a school system or a municipality or a county in certain instances. It's very difficult for consumers to navigate higher ed when we inconsistently fund higher education across the country. So that is our community college kind of work. Again, 3 buckets: affordability, student basic needs, and equipping the field with information so that we can collectively advocate and learn. Questions? Where do you want me to go a little deeper? Does that make sense? Okay.
Go ahead,
Kate.
Luke, if this isn't, I'm not sure, but I'll just ask. Within those big buckets that you just described, are there any specific focus on students with disability, and in particular students with intellectual disability? Is the primary focus of our work?
Okay, so let me go there next. Is that okay?
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right, love it. So let's talk about post-secondary CTE. So one of the things that let's talk about CTE in general. One of the things that we are gearing up for is really the 24 program year, which states will have an opportunity to submit more substantial amendments and revisions in their Perkins state plans. So how familiar is everybody with the Perkins state plan? Okay, so Catherine, again, you got gold star here. So for many states, this is a quasi-regulatory plan. So meaning the information that they put in the state plan acts similarly to state regulations in many states across the country. And so it's a way in which a policy or a set of policy principles can be established and forwarded in terms of opportunities to build kind of that network and to kind of take certain actions to operation. So, and then in 24, it really is and represents kind of when the initial Perkins law was designed to sunset. I don't know that it will sunset in 24. So we are viewing this as an opportunity to kind of dust off state plans and to make sure and to work with states to encourage more substantial revisions and amendments in that planning process. So there are a couple things that we do want to talk about as it relates to kind of post-secondary Perkins programs. So one of those things is states have the ability to determine what type of programs fall within their programmatic portfolio under Perkins. So many states limit that to Pell eligible degree programs within their post-secondary systems that are kind of fall into this space. So they look at 2-year degrees almost exclusively. There are about 10 states that have expanded that definition to include short and long-term credential programs. Some states have included registered apprenticeship programs, in addition to then Pell eligible 2-year and 4-year degree programs in their community and technical college systems. So one of the things that we would like to do is work with states and encourage states to think about post-secondary Perkins as the bridge between things high school and all of higher ed. And in doing so, Kate, like our hope is to make sure that we are focused around student equity, that we are focused around student populations, particularly students with disabilities, English language learners, and other populations in our country that are vulnerable and do not transition or enter higher education or complete higher education at the rate of, essentially white students. So I think there's an opportunity to expand our definition of post-secondary Perkins across the country. And in doing so, we could work across states to collect information around student access, student completion. We could look at rates of credential and degree attainment. And Perkins is one of the few post-secondary programs that actually has an accountability model that's consistently measured from state to state. So we could lead both from a student perspective, but we could learn a whole lot here if we were able to galvanize and build a field across the country in movement in this direction. So that's kind of one of the avenues of policy that we want to explore. A second avenue of policy that we want to explore is states have the ability to determine how their post-secondary funding formulas are derived. So essentially, this is really wonky, but what it essentially means is the way the Perkins law is set up is states are able to offer what's referred to as an alternative post-secondary funding formula. The way that that funding formula is based on right now is it's currently based on Pell eligibility across the different institutions that receive post-secondary Perkins funds, and it's kind of prorated. So what that means is if you have 4 IHEs that are eligible for Perkins funds, those 4 IHEs receive a proportion of funding that is based upon the number of students who are eligible for Pell in those institutions. Does that make sense? I don't know if my explanation is right. If institution 1 enrolls 30% of the students who are Pell eligible in the system, they receive 30% of those generated funds. Does that make sense? Well, so where we would like to push is Pell is a good proxy for income, but it's not the only proxy for income. So things like Medicaid, TANF, SNAP, there are other ways in which we can develop and quantify income based upon programs that an individual is enrolled in, and otherwise connect folks to the right social services and supports, as well as incentivize institutions through funding formulas to enroll students who are economically disadvantaged. So there are a bunch of different things that we can do kind of in this space to move this conversation a little bit more aggressively, particularly in communities that need this type of support, and for people who need this type of support and service. The system should work on behalf of people. So those are like two examples, like on our post-secondary Perkins program, where we want to have some serious conversations with states over the next year and a half to really look at systems and look at the way people are represented in systems, both through models of accountability, through models of financial models, and to ensure that the programs that we offer are offered in a way that help people to transition through various learning levels and through higher levels of education over their lifetime. And then, Kate, the third thing I would offer on the post-secondary space is the coordination of federal programs from in an education to employment continuum. So one of the things that we want to explore and unpack with states is how we think about and blur Perkins funds alongside IDEA, alongside Title IV of WIOA, vocational rehabilitation dollars, to ensure that dollars are offered in complement and that we put the person in the forefront of our system and how those three federal programs wrap around an individual to transition beyond high school into higher levels of education and into our workforce. So those are, I think, three areas on the post-secondary Perkins side that we really want to kind of explore. The lever of change in each of those three is really around state practice. And one of the ways in which we want to encourage that state practice is through advocacy and declaration of those efforts within revisions or amendments to Perkins state plans. And what's neat is each of your states will have an opportunity to kind of go through that and advocate for that. So part of our message is really around bully pulpit and making sure that the information exists for people who can advocate across the field. And then the second part is trying to merge together the timelines so that we can make sure that this conversation can be had across the country, and make sure that people are equipped to have that conversation and to put to paper the type of policy that they want their systems to represent, and the way in which that we can, again, systems around people versus people fitting within systems. So those are things I would throw out there. Where do you want to go, Drew?
I have a question. When you were mentioning about coordination of federal programs, and you mentioned the ones that you mentioned, but for many of our programs, they have become comprehensive transition and post-secondary programs to have. So they are listed on the FAFSA site as, as CTP approved programs. So they've submitted that paperwork and been approved through FAFSA. And some of those programs are where students are taking some courses for credit, or maybe students are taking some course or auditing, as the guidelines sort of lay out comprehensive transition and post-secondary programs. Is there is there guidance on the coordination between Perkins and comprehensive transition and post-secondary programs? And if anyone can say that better than I just said it, please help me clarify what my question is there. I just want to know, because many of our programs are, they're looking at, whether students are going to be able to complete a program, and be able to earn that industry certification. And for some students with intellectual disabilities, they may not be able to go all the way to complete the entire program, or to be able to reach that industry certification that is provided, to folks, that exam for folks that have completed the program. Is there information on the correlation between those two federal? Because I'm seeing those both as being federal also.
Let me add one piece too. This is Denise Roselle. I'm with AUCD, the Association of University Centers on Disabilities, and I'm I work on policy stuff with Think College and this group. OPE is where these programs that generally sit. And then the FAFSA, the CTP, if you have filed the paperwork to do that, then students who are in your programs are eligible for Pell Grants and work study. Not other student loans, but Pell Grants and work study. So that's one piece. And so do you work with the FAFSA folks, OPE, or even OSERS, the Office of Special Education and Rehab Services would be another place within the federal system that kind of overlaps all the work that's being done here. And then there was one other thing, Drew, that you just said that made me think, oh, I should say that too. Shoot. Okay, I'll toss it back to Luke and see that piece of it. And industry recognized credentials. Obviously, there's the industry recognized credential conversation that's happening here. Students in CTPs, in inclusive post-secondary programs, are working toward IHE credentials, not degrees, IHE credentials. So they're credentials approved by the institution of higher ed. They may also be working toward, well, in a few cases, maybe even a degree, but very few. But they also, and that's what this work group is about, may be working toward industry recognized credentials. And those credentials, as Drew says, may or may not, in the form they exist at this moment, be accessible to finish for students. So there's also an interesting accessibility conversation there that may also tie into some of the work that ODEP, Office of Disability Employment Programs at the Department of Labor, is working on, and I don't know this, I'm tossing this part in, on accessible apprenticeships, because I tend to dump, I know it's not all the same, but I tend to dump apprenticeships in my big ball when I'm thinking about industry recognized credentials as well. So there's some things that can happen there, I would hope that we could talk about. So that's kind of both, I don't know whether I made it better or worse, Drew, but kind of, and David's laughing. Thanks, David. You could help with this too.
So Luke, to me, and the conversations we've had, this group is trying to do exactly what we've done in Delaware at the secondary level, but now we want to take it to the post-secondary level and braid and blend those funds and those grant opportunities, scholarship opportunities, whatever you want to call it, just as you've been mentioning, is having that affordable option there for students to go on and move forward to get higher credentials, although they may not be that completer or that credentialer in the true sense of what we've known in the past.
Yeah, I mean, so I think the short answer to the question asked and the continued illustration on where there are opportunities is, I think there are a lot of opportunities in terms of how we could do work differently, and again, how we could put people at the center of systems. I would love to continue to unpack this conversation from your perspectives around like what that policy configuration would need to look like and where you would want to see the different dots connected in terms of like organizationally and where we have the opportunity to leverage influence. So Denise, you talked about like organizational structure. So the entirety of higher education falls under the Office of the Undersecretary. So under the Office of the Undersecretary, there's FSA, there's OPE, and then there's OCTE. And as a team, we do talk weekly around policy objectives and policy vehicles that we think better position people and coordinate services across the whole of each of those three organizations. And then I also meet weekly with my colleagues in the Department of Labor as well as in the Department of Commerce around where there are different connections, like in this instance, across different title programs that might exist under the same piece of law. So, right, if we wanted to look more at like Title IV is actually in-house at Ed under OSERS. But if we wanted to look at things like Title I, you know what I mean, and different carve-outs there, I think there are opportunities to do that. And I would love to have a conversation with this group, like in a future conversation around like, what are those policy positions that you'd like to see the administration take? or like
Wonderful.
where we can kind of put that into existing work streams to be both a vocal advocate as well as create opportunities for states to solve some of these things as well. So I'm interested in both of those conversations as we go forward. And then Dave, you have.
Sure. Thank you. First off, thank you, Luke, for joining us. And to pick up a little bit on what Denise was speaking about, where I work at UMass Boston, we're doing a lot of work on inclusive apprenticeship for people with disabilities. We are finding it to be a interesting and challenging space for some of the same reasons, because again, as you have your conversation with the folks at Department of Labor, where Office of Apprenticeship is, we're finding there's a lot of folks with disabilities who would really benefit from the apprenticeship model, but it's the industry standards are such, and the credentialing requirements are such, just getting in the doors can be a challenge, and then also completing. And obviously we don't want to be watering down standards, but this is the same conversation. This group has a lot along the same lines. So as we look at these things, and frankly, folks look at these things from a policy perspective, it's a really interesting space as we sort of figure out how to get folks with more significant disabilities, not only into higher ed, CTE, but also apprenticeship. But
Yep.
It is a journey, to put it lightly.
So I would love to talk about both of those things. And apprenticeship might be a little bit unique in that space, as would be the higher ed policy conversation. And then David, just in terms of context, in like this is Delaware context. Delaware is one of the states that provided tuition assistance for students that are enrolled in registered apprenticeship programs, meaning the state paid for the related training and instruction at no cost to the employer or the individual. And there are a couple states that do that. And that program was administered in my office previously. So the way that we structured apprenticeship in Delaware, it was a joint education and labor initiative, where on the education side, we focused on the post-secondary component of that. And on the labor side, they focused on the registration and the employer recruitment. So it was a nice relationship. That is very much the relationship that we're also trying to create. So there are some policy components, and there are some things that we would like to do through some exercised authority to think about the expansion of registered apprenticeship and like some, I think what would be fun things in the field. I also think there's a lot of interest on the Department of Labor side. So, if it's not me in that conversation, it would be me and someone else. But I think that would be a lot of fun. And I think what you're seeing from the executive branch is really two things. So the first is there is a huge commitment to blurring the line between higher education and employment, and registered apprenticeship is one of the principal vehicles that the Biden-Harris administration sees that taking shape through, because it is everything that we want for people. It is gainful employment and education simultaneously. It is the entirety of the outcome, and it is the ability of the network, and it's the ability to integrate the individual within that workspace. And it's also a structured model in which wages increase and levels of education increase, which is almost it's what we want in terms of like employment and wage outcomes. But I also think that you're seeing some pretty substantial investments. I think there was $330 million that was appropriated in the recent omnibus to the expansion of registered apprenticeship specifically. So there are likely some additional resources that we would want to consider braiding, Dale, to your comment earlier, which is neat. Okay.
Just one last. I think that the push on diversity of apprenticeships is great to see. That's kind of a lot of space that is inclusive of people with disabilities. So that's very much appreciated. So let's figure out how to leverage that. But thanks.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have a couple follow-up conversations that I think will be fun to kind of move into and unpack as we move down the road.
Thank you. We also have some information in the chat. So if you have opened in the chat, I know that Kathleen Taylor, who is with our Florida Department of Education and Career Technical Education, has written information about Florida's state plan. And thank you so much for sharing that, Kathleen. I really appreciate that. Are there other questions that folks may have? Anyone?
Okay. Well, what I would just like to say first and foremost is thank you. Really two things that I hope to leave you with. The first is just our interest in learning from you. And secondly, being partners with you in how we continue to advocate for people and communities across our country. And to Dale's comment earlier, I think federal programs are best when states are able and communities are able to kind of shape those things based upon the respective needs of the people that they're closest to. So I would love to continue this conversation and also make sure that kind of our voice collectively is represented in our policy actions and the work that my office will take forward. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to joining us today. We would look forward to additional conversations. Certainly the information that you have shared today has been very meaningful and enlightening for me, understanding more about Octave. And so thank you for all of that. And so on behalf of the work group, we appreciate you taking the time to be here today and sharing with us. And we look forward to inviting you again.
Thanks. Look forward to it.
Okay.
See you, Dale, and everyone else. It's nice to meet you.
Very nice
Thank
to meet
you.
you.
Thanks, Luke.
Okay. Well, that was wonderful. I do want to thank Dale Matusevich, who's one of our work group members, for helping to coordinate that. Thanks so much, Dale. That was really, wow, what a great opportunity for our work group. And it's wonderful to see folks in leadership positions who are interested in having ongoing conversations to see how we can move things forward for all students, especially the students that our work group is focused on, students with intellectual disabilities. So thank you, Dale, for the time spent in helping me coordinate that.
No, you're welcome, Drew. And like I said, I think Luke's can be a great partner for us. He really is kind of going back to that old cliche of thinking outside the box. And he's really willing to kind of stretch the limits of possibilities. He doesn't work within the constraints. Well, he works within the constraints of regulations and everything, but he also looks at them to figure out, okay, what is really the intent here as we move forward. So I think he's going to be a great opportunity for us to partner with in the future.
I will say, Dale, Drew, and thank you to Dale for bringing him in. It's really, there are a variety of conversations, and I see Deborah jumped off, but she was on one this morning. There are a variety of conversations that are think college related, writ large, with a number of federal agencies right now. So for instance, this morning we had a conversation with one, and she raised ODAP and the Department of Labor. So to have Luke also say something about Department of Labor, there may be some real connections here that we can make for this work group, and obviously this CTE stuff, but just in general, I mean, the more that we can have the Biden-Harris administration, while we've got that, looking across departments is really nice. And the fact that he specifically raised, when I ask about it, I meet weekly with the people from OPE and FAFSA. Okay, that's a big deal. I just want to emphasize both thanks to Dale and a big deal to have some of those players, have him talking to some of those players. That's fabulous.
Yes. And so we'll talk more about, in sometime in the future, possibly having Deputy Assistant Secretary Ryan join us again for an ongoing conversation as we move forward. So I'll go ahead and go back. I know that our time is moving along, and so I'll move through the next part of the program. So again, Jackie, I don't know if I had the opportunity to thank you for your work and for sharing that today as we move forward, and to let everyone know that we will be sending out a draft, and we look forward to your input on that. As a work group, you are critical to the success of our work, and your input everyone's input is very important. We have a wide range of experience, but we also have many, many years of experience here. And so we want to make sure that we have that. So again, as we look at those modules for program development, I've shared, and I think I also may have emailed out the table of a draft table of contents, and that's just a starting point. It's just thoughts of different parts of the development stage. And so I look forward to your comments on that also. And I'll do a follow-up email to this meeting on different areas where we would like your feedback as you have time and can provide that. So I wanted to also just share with the success story mentioned earlier, and we also will be having some additional, and I just want to thank those people that maybe they're not all in yet, but I started by talking with Bailey Smith at Pulaski Technical College, which is part of the University of Arkansas, and Vivian Vieta at Robert Morgan Educational Center and Technical College, that's in Miami. Doris Hernandez at McFadder Technical College in Weston, which is the Fort Lauderdale area, and Christian Zimmerman at Fort Myers and Cape Coral Technical Colleges for stories of student success. And we know that when students and families see success stories of students that are like them, it gives them encouragement and helps them plan better for the future. So I want to thank you all for helping me, and to other members, we'll be reaching out to you for stories. And if you have a story of a student that you would like to share, please feel free to share that with me. I want to remind everybody that February is CTE Awareness Month, and Career and Technical Education Month is a public awareness campaign, and it's hosted by the Association on Career and Technical Education that takes place in February to celebrate the accomplishment of programs and importance of CTE for all students of all ages. And at the Florida Center and at Think College, we're going to make sure that we have information on social media so that we can really help folks understand, first off, that it's CTE Awareness Month, but understand that career technical education is an option in inclusive post-secondary education for families and also for programs that may be interested in developing an inclusive post-secondary education program.
I'll just throw in a quick little, I'm sorry, Drew.
Thank you. Sure.
I think we are going to be doing quite a bit of social media on CTE Awareness Month. So we probably will be directing folks to that webpage that Drew shared with y'all earlier. So that's a good reason to sort of make sure you look at it and that you like what's there about you, because I do think we'll probably be directing some traffic there on our website.
Thank you, Kate. So just to remind you, the affinity group for career and technical education, we had our first meeting back in September, and we've already had our second meeting. And so we have a meeting coming up in February, on February 21st, and it's at 3. And we have, we're going to be talking about credentials. And so please look at the affinity group on the thinkcollege.net webpage, or send me an email and I'll be happy to send you a link to register to that. And it's just a time for folks who are interested in career technical education to have a conversation on different topics. We usually have a focus, but that's based on the input of the group. And we also always ask the group what they're interested in knowing more about. And we just have a great conversation where different folks can ask questions and share, and we can do just work as a group. I also wanted to share with you that our next meeting will be Tuesday, April 25th at the same time, 3 to 4:30. And we're going to be working on and talking through many of our products, sharing updates on the work that we've been doing, talking about the module, and hopefully at that time we'll be far beyond a table of contents, and we'll actually have content for many of those modules to look at, as well as hopefully the Perkins Fastback, having that ready and finished by that point, hopefully. And so Nithya Govindasamy is who is one of our CTE work group members, is going to talk about advanced CTE, and their purpose is to advance career technical education, just so that we know what resource that is. They do have some great resources, and I'm so glad that she's a member of our group and participates. For the July meeting, we had mentioned earlier about having a face-to-face meeting, but we've sort of changed those plans to doing all of our meetings virtually. And so I'm going to be sending out a doodle poll for both July 2023 with a couple of weeks there for us to identify a time to meet, and also for October 23, so that we can all get that on our calendars. I'm not sure if you're like me, but I was looking at my calendar the other day and I said, you know what, the year is filling up really quickly with different activities. So we want to go ahead and get those dates on the books, on your calendar, so that we're good to go. Another thing that I wanted to share was there's a great webinar opportunity through the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the collaborative. And Jackie, do you want to share anything more about this?
Sure. Just quickly, it comes out of, we did interviews, focus groups with a few of our states that participate in our network meetings, just to gather additional information from them. And so we synthesized that research or that information and have put together some key pieces that are important for those collaborations to work.
Great. And we know that, in TAC, their focus is secondary, but it's also students transitioning to post-secondary. Our focus is post-secondary, but we know that we have to also, be thinking about students that are in secondary. So it's a great collaborative effort. And so there's the information, and you can go to Transition TA, and you will have to do a login to be able to get into the website, but you can find out more information. And if you have any questions about that, please feel free to email me or Jackie, and we'll both be happy to be able to share that with you. So I want to take some time. I wanted to make sure that I shared that information, but I'd like to take some time just for discussion on things that you've seen happening in career technical education, or technical assistance needs that you have been made aware of, or ideas that you may have developed about ways to expand post-secondary career technical education. As you're thinking, I'll just share with you right now, we at the Florida Center for Students with Unique Ability, and I do think it's because of having this wonderful opportunity to collaborate with Think College and to focus a little bit more on career technical education, that we currently are working with 8 technical colleges to develop programs. So we're having great success and a lot of interest here in Florida. And I really want to, look at how we can help build that interest in other states. And so if you have ideas around that, it would be greatly appreciated. But we have everything from some of our very small and rural technical colleges to some of our very urban area. We're working with Hillsborough County, which is the Tampa area. We're working with Pinellas County, which is Clearwater and St. Petersburg. Both of those technical colleges in both of those areas to be able to develop programs, just as an example of some of the more urban areas. So I'd love to hear from you all before we adjourn. And then you also have, the social media. So please check in there, and also with Think College and their social media, because there's going to be lots of information that's going to be shared as we move into February later this week. So before we adjourn, thoughts or questions you might have? I know you're not a quiet group.
So this is David Hoff at ICI. I guess the one thing that I'm
It's
interested
about
in,
our-
I'm interested in a lot of things, but because the work I'm doing is more on the apprenticeship avenue right now. Lessons learned from inclusive higher ed and also linkages between inclusive higher ed and apprenticeships. That's an area I definitely think I'd like to explore further. I mean, one thing we are learning in this work is the critical need to have a pipeline of individuals who are basically prepared for the fields where there are apprenticeships. So I think continuing to
I wondered, David, I think we mentioned David did a presentation to the ICI staff about the apprenticeship project that he's been speaking about today, the other day, and we mentioned during that call. But I think we just published a really interesting piece that you guys might be interested in if you haven't seen it, which is the Vanderbilt University Next Step program. Wrote a brief about how they established an apprenticeship project through their program. So the program was doing some of the academic pieces or training pieces, and the Vanderbilt University Daycare Center or Early Childhood Center, or whatever, was the site for the apprenticeship. And so it's a really nice partnership between the university and apprenticeships and a program for students with intellectual disability around an inclusive approach to apprenticeship. So people might be interested in that piece.
Where
David,
would we
you in
find that
particular.
at, Kate?
I will get a link and pop it in the chat, but if you
Okay.
go to our website, I'm wondering, we just published it, so I'm wondering if it's maybe even on our homepage as one of our newer resources. It won't stay there forever, but I don't even think it is. No, it's not that new, so it's not in the latest but let me get the link and I'll pop it in the chat. And Drew, if you're wanting to share it out to the group in case for folks who weren't here, or
I certainly will. I will share it with the entire group.
so it's developing registered apprenticeships within inclusive post-secondary education programs is the title. And like I said, it's work that was done by the Next Steps program at Vanderbilt University in Nashville.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate here, but we have our project in Massachusetts, but we're also part of a national center with Jobs for the Future. So I think, which is looking at inclusive apprenticeships, and I think any kind of models or even successes people are seeing of linking higher ed with apprenticeship would be great to know about and share for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Great.